So I'm going to take you on a quick tour of a show that was here at Trinity for about 4 weeks, just as a record, and so those of you who weren't able to get to see the exhibit can, to some degree, see it with my small short video. What I'm going to try and do is give you the opportunity to go ahead and zoom in on any of the labels that you see attached with images here, so you can actually read them on the video. The main axe to grind of this show really is the importance of this little print. And this is a print by a fellow named William Bartlett, who was a Brit who came to this country and visited many of our sites of the built environment as well as the natural environment. And as he made this trip, and he made it many times, I think he really fell in love with our new republic. And this would have been in 1837 that he began traveling to this country. In any event, this print is really quite a remarkable, very small print, and yet its composition is, I think, absolutely terrific. But as a preliminary to understanding better that print, I've also included images of other scenes from the green. And what you'll see is that from the point in time when the green began to have 3 very important buildings on it, as opposed to singular buildings sort of scattered about, which led to the building of the 3 churches, which was done between 1812 and 1815, that really the whole point of view that artists took was as though they were standing on not on Temple Street, on Chapel Street, and looking across the lower green, the expanse of it. And it's really with the print down at that end of the show by William Bartlett that you see a change in the point of view. And honestly, I think that one big reason that Bartlett chose this other point of view from the backside of the churches to engage the State House was because he could do so without lying as much, without removing elm trees from the scene. So that in itself is worthy of noting, just by virtue of that different point of view. And you can see it probably best if I include the Punderson prints on your left here and a view of William Bartlett's print on the right. And the print by William Bartlett really engages 3 buildings. And interestingly, he gives the name to the print, the Gothic church, which might seem a red herring at first, because when you look at it, obviously it's the State House that's of most importance. But if you put it in the context of what was going on in New Haven at the time, it makes a great deal more sense. And what we have to remember is that in 1818, the state constitution declared that the state was no longer in the thrall of theocracy, and that, in fact, the state of Connecticut in the new republic finally, amongst all the 13 original colonies turned states, finally bought into the concept of the separation of church and state. And I feel that it's this print, and I'm, by the way, the one who organized the show, Peg Chambers, that in fact what the print is meaning to emblemize is that moment of the separation of church and state, authenticated in the state constitution ratified in 1818. And hence the name Gothic Church, because the Gothic Church is the church that belongs to the newly named Episcopalians, formerly Anglicans, formerly thought to be in close association with George III and the Tories of the Revolution, as opposed to patriots of the Revolution, when in fact, if you go back into Trinity's records, almost all the members of Trinity were patriots as opposed to Tories, which is interesting in itself. But we've always been a diverse congregation. Anyway, this show is, as you can see here, it really is our last bicentennial celebration event. And in that regard, I think it's important for it to be recorded in this fashion. Ethiel Town, that's the other person to remember in this exhibit. And we have here a quickie kind of summary by me of Ethiel and his basic importance. And I like to argue that it's Ethiel in his building of the State House alongside his two churches, Trinity, the Gothic Church, and Center Church, the Neoclassical Church, was really setting the stage for what he saw as a development of the architectural profession in this country. Ethiel actually lived in New Haven. He had an enormous library that he opened to anyone who wanted to use the library. He really was extremely in tune with all the kind of Age of Enlightenment thoughts of the period. And it's through him that I think New Haven's green gets its clarity. And if only to record 3 buildings on the green built by Ethiel Town, designed and built by him, that would be reason enough for Bartlett's print. But I think you have to read into the name of the print, the Gothic Church, a great deal more. So a part of this exhibit was a little worksheet print that I had, which explains the basic pairing of 2 systems of perspectival viewpoint. You have one that's 2-point perspective based on the State House itself, and the other that's a center, single point perspective, vanishing point, that really is for only the 2 churches. So that you get this kind of dichotomy right there, that the State House itself, compositionally and perspectively, holds sway, as it were, over the 2 churches, which share the same vanishing point on this image of the green. So that in itself is a kind of reinforcement of the whole concept of the separation of church and state. So with that, I'm going to leave you, but not before I point out this lovely painting, which is, I think, probably done between 1890 and 1900, shortly after the demolition of the State House, which took place in 1889. This is a whole story in itself, and one that's really very interesting because, in fact, the State House was really thought of as temporary architecture, and it was understood that if the shared responsibilities of holding the legislative session, either in Hartford or New Haven, alternately, ended up being that the capital became New Haven, they intended from the very start to tear this building down and replace it with a permanent building. But what had happened was that over time, the city government, which had always been housed within the State House, moved across the green into Henry Austin's building in 1860. And from 1860 to 1889, this building became like a community center. It was much loved, and it's actually Henry Peck who records carefully the whole controversy in that period from 1860 to 1889, its demolition date. When the city was really in an uproar, all the residents wanted the State House to stay, but alas, it didn't. But there was such a hue and cry, and there was such love of the State House that, interestingly, as far in the future as 1909, postcards are still available and being sent from New Haven. That record their beloved State House. So I guess the only other thing to say about Ethiel Town is that, in fact, Ethiel, I see as the link to the beginning of the use of the term Gothic revival through his interest in carefully distinguishing between the Greek revival, a term used in the 1820s already, and the Gothic revival. And to me, that ends up being quite apparent in the very fact that Trinity Church on Wall Street in Manhattan was but a block away from the building of the Custom House by Ethiel Town at the same time, exactly the same time, around 1840, which ironically is just about the time that Bartlett is making one of his many trips to this country. So, it's a convergence of many things. Anyway, enjoy the show.